Hello everyone, my name is Vasko and I'm the lecturer of tuba and euphonium at Valdosta State University in Valdosta, Georgia. Welcome to VTEC and welcome to my presentation. Today we will be talking about jazz. When I was a freshman at the University of Miami, I became a jazz major not really knowing what to do. I didn't really know anything about jazz. And I learned a whole lot of theoretical knowledge. Now, unfortunately, I had to leave UM due to financial reasons. I had to transfer out. And so I left with all of this knowledge about jazz and jazz harmony, and I didn't really know how to do any of it on my instrument. So I spent the next couple of years trying to piece these things together, and this is what I came up with. This presentation is dedicated to my teacher, Sam Palafian. He's the one who encouraged me to study jazz. I wasn't really sticking out in my undergrad the way I wanted to. I wasn't the best player. I wasn't the smartest kid. And I went to him and I said, how can I stick out? What can I do to be different? And he said, well, you've got good ears, so let's go make you a jazz major. And he marched me into the dean's office and we signed the papers and that was it. I was there. He always talked about how important listening was and how important it was to use your imagination, not only in your playing, but just in your day-to-day life. So I encourage all of you to continue to dream big and think big and listen to a lot of music. So, what does it mean to fit in with an ensemble, particularly a jazz group, but really any group? I think of these things as emulating and demonstrating, okay? When we emulate, we show that we can listen to our peers. We do what they do. We try and mimic their playing. We fit into their sound as much as possible, their tuning, their articulation, all that. We blend as much as we can. After we emulate, we demonstrate. Now what that is taking your unique voice and supplementing the group with that. We don't learn what they do just so we can ignore them later, but rather we take those skills we learned and we add our voice to it in order to make the group better. So we're taking our voice and using it to improve the group, using skills that the group has taught us. Essential skills in jazz. I see three big ones. For me, those three things are time, ears, and style. Let's talk about those. So time. Time is the most important thing in music, I think. I believe that it's organized time that keeps sounds from falling apart and it keeps us engaged. And time is also important because it's how other people can play together. So it's always important to work on your time. This is my favorite thing. It's my best friend, right? Your metronome is your duet partner. You make music with it. You don't just play at it. So see if you can treat it like a colleague and see how musical you can be with your metronome. It's so important. If you ever get lost when you're playing, it's important that you keep in time, even if you don't really know where you are. It's much more noticeable when you lose time than when you play a wrong note, I think. So always keep in time. Next is ears, which is our oral homework, scales, harmonies, chords, understanding symmetrical harmonies like chromatic scales and diminished chords and all that stuff. Knowing your way around the instrument. Knowing your way around the horn is very important, and it enables you to read better and play better and pick things up more quickly. So time and ears. And then we have style. Style is figuring out how those things fit together. It's one thing to have time, it's one thing to know your scales, but if you don't know what kind of song you're playing, if you don't know the words to the song or the genre or style that you're playing or where it comes from, you're going to have a hard time. You don't want to show up and play a bossa bass line at a cumbia gig. You don't want to swing a bass line on a Latin gig, stuff like that. It's really important to know how these tools that we make with the time and the ears fit into the style. And when you can do all of those things, you've got more of a complete package. So now, it's time to play. We're going to talk about exercises that can get your foot in the door. The whole point of this presentation is to demystify jazz. Growing up, I always felt like some people could do it and some people couldn't, and I was just one of those people that never would be able to. But I've learned that isn't the case. With detailed practice, you can actually figure out how to do all these things. So here's my method. I call my method from point A to point B, one step at a time. Because I think of changes as getting from one place to another as efficiently and creatively as possible. So, as we do this, it's important to note a few things. We'll be setting harmonic parameters. That is, we'll be starting with roots and fifths, and moving to chords, moving to scales. It's so important to keep with these parameters because even if they seem easy at first, you want to be able to exhaust all your options of playing a certain change. If you ever walk yourself into a hole, you're going to want a way out. And that way, by working on all these different configurations, we're also practicing our ways out in case of emergency on a gig. We'll be doing different harmonic parameters and also following different directions, whether ascending or descending. This is a great way to practice anything, setting rules like this and being very thorough, but I found it goes very, very well with learning to play these changes. So, without further ado, let's play. Please don't forget to mute yourself. All right, here we go. So first thing we'll be doing is starting with an F blues on roots and fifths, ascending only, okay? So only playing the root and the fifth and only going up. I personally like to go root, root, fifth, fifth for the one chord bars. So for example, the first bar, F, F, C, C. And then when there's two chord bars, I like to go root, fifth, root, fifth. So roots and fifths, ascending only. Here we go. So how did we do with that? Did we do okay? Did we survive? I just want you all to know that if you don't get it right away, please don't be discouraged. It took me quite a long time to figure out how to do all of this. So again, if you don't get it right away, just keep trying. Let's try roots and fifths one more time. Well done. Up next will be roots and fifths descending. Same as before, root, root, fifth, fifth, and the one chord bars. And then the two chord bars, root, down to the fifth, root, down to the fifth. What I want you to notice in this though is how the voice leading is starting to take shape. There are certain chord changes that are easier to ascend into and some that are easier to descend into. One, for example, is our C to F, 251 C F B flat. And when we descend this, I want you to notice how this smooths out. Works pretty nicely. So take notice when something works well with voice leading, because that'll be really useful on stage. So here we go, roots and fifths, descending. Nice, very well done. So another thing that I mentioned earlier that I just want to bring back is, if you happen to get lost during this, remember that the most important skill is time. So if you happen to get lost, start beating time on an F or on a quarter note that you think might be the root until you can find out where we are and jump back in. A lot of the times when you're performing, people won't always notice if you miss a change, but they'll almost always notice if you're out of time. So let's keep that in mind moving forward. Up next, we're going to do fully realized seventh chords ascending. So just a refresher on jazz harmony and notation, just a 7 means a dominant seventh, so a major chord with a dominant seventh attached. The circle 7 is a fully diminished seventh chord, and minor 7 is exactly like it says. Now, you've probably already figured this out, but looking at that B diminished seventh looks a little ugly, a little tricky. But the only difference between that and a B flat 7 is the root of B flat to B. Right, so it's a one note difference, so don't let that deter you. Now when we're in our 2 chord bars, we're going to still do roots and fifths, but we're going to follow the direction we're going. So in this case it's ascending, so roots and fifths on the 2 chord bars, ascending. There's only 2 beats per chord, so it's probably best to keep it at a root and a fifth. Let's go ahead and try this out. Fully realized seventh chords, ascending. Nice. Hoping we all did okay on that. Another important thing to bring up again is to remember that these parameters are in place for a reason, right? Even if you know you can play these really well, it's important to go through all of them the same exact way. This is because if you get stuck in a hole on a gig and you walk yourself into a place you can't get out of, you'll have a better idea of how to escape that smoothly instead of just getting stuck. So we always want to know any way out of a sticky situation, especially when we're walking bass lines and reading changes. Up next is our descending seventh chords and descending roots and fifths on the 2-chord bars. While we're doing this, you want to take a special look at the voice leading. We'll be going root, 7th, 5th, 3rd, and those thirds sometimes turn into leading tones to the next bar. For example, in the first measure we get F, E flat, C, A, and A is the leading tone to B flat. See how many of those you can pick up on while we do this. Descending seventh chords. Well done. Pressing onward, we are very close to our coherent walking line. We're going to talk about chord scales. I've gone ahead and written out the different scales and modes that correspond with the chords that are written within these changes, just to save time. Now, we're still going to stick with our parameters, so when we do chord scales ascending, I want you to take the first 4 notes of the scale going up. When we do chord scales descending later, we'll be taking those last 4 notes and playing them from top to bottom. Right now, let's focus on ascending. When we get our 2-chord bars, let's continue with our roots and fifths. We'll be doing something else with them later, but for now, let's stick with what we know. So let's go ahead and do our chord scales ascending. Nice. We move on now to descending chord scales. As I mentioned previously, what we'll be doing is taking the back half of these scales that I've written out and playing them from top to bottom. So for example, this first bar will be F down to B flat, down to F mixolydian mode. You'll notice that's some pretty good voice leading. As I mentioned before, with the 2-chord bars, we'll do roots and fifths, and since we're playing descending scales, we will do descending roots and fifths this time. Let's give it a go. Well done. You may have noticed some voice leading problems with the chord scales. What happened there? We got to our root, the F, a beat too early. Now, that's normally a problem. If you get to the root too early or too late, it can show a perceived lack of time or that you might be lost, and it'll throw off your bandmates. So it's important to make sure that we arrive at downbeats at the right moment. This is why practicing bass lines is so useful, is that we're outlining functional harmony. So what we can do to avoid getting to a downbeat too early is to throw in a passing tone. Passing tones are pretty simple. I like to stack them towards whatever it is I'm going to. So for example, I put the passing tone between the G and then the downbeat F by putting a G flat there. If I wanted to do one on the way up from F, there's already an A going to B flat. So my answer would be to put an A flat next to that. You want it as close to the place that you're going as possible. So passing tones are important. They're pretty easy to figure out when you give it a couple tries. The next thing I want to talk about is what are we going to do with these 2-5-1s? We've been doing roots and fifths this whole time, and those are great. But there's another thing we can do too, and they're called turnarounds. A turnaround might look like this. Now what I did there in the 2-5-1 and B flat is I went C, leading tone to the F, F, leading tone to the B flat. And both of these were ascending leading tones, so they were coming from below. You could also do them coming from above. Right? Or you can mix it up. That's really up to you. But passing tones and turnarounds are the things that are going to make this sound like a walking bass line and not an exercise. So good luck in practicing these, and I'll play you out. That'll do it for our playing today. Thanks. Now how can we practice all this great stuff we just did? I've made a simple flowchart that can help you out. For example, let's say you take a new chart, no more F blues. On day 1, just read it in roots and fifths, and get a feel for it. 10 minutes. Day 2, read it in chords, read it in scales if you feel like it. Another 10 minutes. Day 3, do all the stuff from days 1 and 2, and then do chord scales, do it all within an octave, find new parameters. It doesn't really matter how you practice all this stuff. The only point is that you're consistent, right? If you're not going to be a jazz player, you don't need to devote your life to it. 10 minutes a day doing something methodical and simple and consistently will help you get where you want to go with this kind of stuff. It really doesn't take as much time as you think it would, and you can absolutely balance this with whatever else you've got going on in your practice and in your life. I want to thank you all so much for listening today, for playing along, for watching, for participating in VTEC. I want to thank the VTEC sponsors and organizers for putting this together and allowing me to chat at you today. If you have any questions, please reach out to my email. I have a website where you can find me, and I'm also on social media. I'm not a hard guy to get a hold of, and I normally reply pretty quickly. Once again, I just thank you so much for watching. I have a larger version of this presentation, so if you're a university professor and you'd like me to present to your studio, let's be in touch. I'd be happy to give it again. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of VTEC. Have a good one.